We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have people with us as guests that I am so excited about because they are former students of ours, Melba and Caleb Pearson. Excuse me, we got that wrong before.
Pearson Voskamp.
Melba Pearson was Pearson before she was married, but now she's Voskamp. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're so excited.
It is so great to have you all here. Tell us a little bit about, each of you, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, how you came to Veritas, and where you went after Veritas.
So my family started homeschooling when I'm the oldest, and my parents started homeschooling when I went into kindergarten. And by the time I was ready to go into high school, my mom was pretty busy with my brothers, and they both had kind of special educational needs. And she was looking for some sort of program that would give me a really great classical Christian education, and something that I could do a little more independently on my own and have some interactions with other students and other teachers. I'm not entirely sure how she found Veritas, but she did.
And we're grateful for that.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I started Veritas in 7th grade and continued through my graduation from high school. I did all of my high school classes online exclusively with Veritas, and it was a fabulous experience. It's an experience I look back on with a great amount of enthusiasm. It was great. After that, I took a year off from academics, and then I got my bachelor's in art history at Harvard. And then after that, I got my master's.
You were our first Harvard student, which was exciting to me. And of course, I had a chance to visit with you at Harvard briefly one day, and that was fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I remember that. Conversation that we had. It was great. Yeah. And then after my time at Harvard, I went on and I got my master's at NYU in art history and museum studies. Shortly after that, I married Caleb, who I had originally met through Veritas. And now we live up in Canada and run our own business. So
wonderful. Caleb, what's your background? How did you come about these relationships?
So, yes, my story is a bit similar to Melba's in that my parents had started homeschooling us. I was the oldest when I entered kindergarten. My mom read up in Charlotte Mason, Ambleside Online, the whole 9 yards. And we started out with I believe the original the Veritas Press, Veritas flashcards, the history cards. And then we also had the old cassette tape that sort of had the song that sang you through that. And every week going to swimming lessons, we'd pop that in, and it would sing through all.
I'll bet, and I don't want you to do it today, but I'll bet if I started the song, you could sing it the whole way through with me.
I know good chunks of it. There's parts like sometimes I'll be humming in my head, and I'm like, okay, I'm forgetting some here, but I still find it helpful for like hanging where in the timeline is that, and that gives me
the order of things. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess that was chronologically in my life the first experience with Veritas, and then I think it was I forget if I was 12 or 13. I think I was the second cohort with Veritas Online. It was still back in the WebEx days. I wasn't the first. I know it was the second batch of classes, and I had Mrs. Hensley, and it was so enjoyable. She was a great teacher. I loved Omnibus, so that was sort of the start of that. I did not go all the way through like Melba here in Canada to get into our version of colleges. We call them universities. To get in, I needed. They were pretty flexible. Like all they needed was the 6 credits from a high school, grade 12. So I did that. Melba and I sort of lost touch, and then
Well, my understanding is that you all actually met having taken several classes together.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, what the audience, our listeners don't know is that Melba and I were talking a little bit before you got here, and here's what she said. I want to hear your version. She said that when I asked, when did the romantic interest start? Her comment was, well, for Caleb, it was during the classes that we took together, but I was disinterested at that point. How do you respond to that, Caleb?
Well, in hindsight, that was a pretty fair that's a pretty fair assessment. Like you keep growing through life. But I really thought the world of Melba. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. She was well spoken, and I don't think she was really interested in boy. Well, not me as a boy at that point in time. Sort of let that go. But I always sort of had in the back of my mind, like nobody really measured up to Melba. So in third year, I had well, actually, my friend was doing exchange program in the UK, and they had a ridiculous 3 weeks off for spring break. So we sort of did a grand tour. We lined up 10 cities, and we did it all in 21 days. And so I was just posting stuff on Instagram, and we got to Vienna, and we were being young, poor. We were just doing the free tour guides, and the tour guide wasn't that great. Ended the tour in Vienna in this courtyard with this beautiful old church, by far the oldest looking thing we had seen all day. And he doesn't address it at all, like does not talk about it, does not mention it, does not mention the name. And I had asked about it, he didn't really seem to know anything, so I took a picture of it and posted on Instagram. And Melba then messages me and goes, I've been there. And that was I mean, we had talked a bit, but that was really the start of reconnecting and then grabbing coffee, and then the rest is history, starting dating.
Well,
but
jump over that, get to the rest is history kind of thing too quickly here. So I'm going to give you a chance to now push back on Melba. I'm not trying to cause a fight here, but I'm trying to play fair. So give you a chance. What was it that happened that caused her to decide that now she was interested in you more than just a casual relationship?
Well, Caleb reached out. I was a junior in college, so it was my third year of university. And he reached out and said, I was in Boston at the time, and he said, I'm going to be down in Boston on business. I later found out that the business was kind of he did technically have a business meeting, but he scheduled the business meeting around me, not me around the business meeting, which is what I thought was going on.
Caleb, any red-blooded young man would do that. Good work.
And he said, like, hey, do you want to grab coffee, catch up? It's been a while. I said, sure. We ended up having a really delightful chat over coffee. We talked about books. We talked about Veritas, of course. We really from that very first conversation, it's funny that we're here today talking about books that we've written and published together, because that was our first conversation outside of school, was talking about our favorite books, our favorite children's books, our favorite young adult books. We probably spent 2.5 hours just talking about books and drinking coffee, and it was great.
And then our second or third date, we actually got a bunch of children's books, and we just spread them out all over the floor in your dorm room. And we just read through all the
we basically went to all of the fun secondhand bookstores in Boston on a date and just bought secondhand children's books and shared our favorites. So this has been an ongoing, from the beginning of our love story, from before that, our individual interest in books, but it's been a big part of our relationship, I guess, all the way through.
Well, it's common practice for someone like me to say to someone like Caleb, you did well, but I'm going to say that both of you did.
Thank you.
This is exciting. And it's exciting to me to see that people met as part of our organization, part of our classes, that has turned into your relationship personally and what you're doing together in the publishing world, which we'll talk about in just a moment. That's exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, yeah,
We wouldn't be sitting here
we wouldn't be
necessarily.
sitting here if it weren't for you too. So
So what reconnected us, that is Veritas, me, and the two of you, was that you reached out and said, hey, we've got a book we'd like to send you, we'd like you to see, we'd like you to know about. Tell us about that book, and then tell us how you got to the point of that book becoming a reality and what you're doing from a publishing standpoint.
well, so the book that we sent you, the kind of big one that we wanted to introduce you to, it's called God Made Only One You. It's a children's picture book, and we actually wrote it. We had our first child back in July, and we wrote it and dedicated it to her. And it's the fourth book that we worked on together. We started, so basically the Keeping Company, which is the company that Caleb and I run together, started originally.
Somebody listening wanted to look up what you've done. The Keeping Company is what to Google.
Yes, thekeepingcompany.com. That's our website.
We're also on Amazon now, but we always prefer to serve people directly if we can.
Well, clearly, if people want to know about the organization, you're going to learn more at your website than or Amazon. I understand you can buy books at Amazon, but you don't learn about the history of a company.
Yeah. So it originally started with kind of Advent resources and Christmas resources, Christian family resources for celebrating the holy seasons. And Caleb started that actually when he was 14. So the whole time we were like doing Veritas together, he was simultaneously creating products and running his business and all of that. And then when
the main one is the countdown to Christmas, a 25-day countdown. And I later had made it to also do birthdays, 10 days. Why? Children like counting down from 10, and it's a good number to count down to a birthday from. And so then we have been discussing about, well, how can we add more meaning to that? And like, what about a 10-day children's book? It can be used for birthdays or independently, of a countdown of God's wonders and blessings, culminating in the wonder that God made you. Which is pretty spectacular. And then there's a Louis Giglio sermon series, Indescribable. And he talks about how the vastness of the stars breathed into being. And then we also see in Genesis and Job that the breath in our lungs was breathed there by God, and sort of wanted to tie and bookend those together. So we start with countless stars and then go start our countdown and then end with the wonder of God making only one you. So to skip ahead a little bit.
So that's kind of the premise of the book, is this countdown from, God breathes into existence the wonder of the very stars, and then you count down through all of God's wonders and blessings, and God breathed life into you as an individual, as a specific, unique person with this glorious purpose.
Tying into the other countdown resources we provide at the Keeping Company.
Okay. So what are all the resources that you have created at this point? There are 4 books that have been published, the ones that you described and a couple others, and you can feel free to describe those too. And what other things have you done so far?
So the main the main sort of resource we have is, like Caleb was saying, the countdown spiral. It's a wooden spiral, and you can use it to count down to birthdays or anniversaries. You can use it to count down the days of Advent to Christmas, or the days of Lent to Easter. The kind of, I guess, adult book that we wrote is actually a devotional designed to accompany this wreath. Right. And that book was born from my art historical background. And we were kind of thinking, what's a way that we can combine Caleb's interest and my skill set. So we created this devotional that features classical artwork from throughout history with names of Jesus and daily devotionals to help guide you through the seasons of Advent and Lent. We have the children's book, God Made Only One You, that also has the countdown element. We have another Christmas children's book that's a really sweet little story. It was our first book that we wrote together. And it's just this cute little story of a little shepherd girl who, helps people throughout her day. And she's headed to the hills to see her little baby lamb, and she ends up getting there like too late to see the birth of her baby lamb. But later that night, all these angels appear in the heavens, and they guide her and the rest of the shepherds to the manger scene, and she sees the birth of the king. So that's our other little children's book. And then just in the last couple of years, we kind of expanded a lot of our resources to include a gratitude component. So we have kind of a gratitude collection, and that's our other book, kind of geared more towards adults or young adults, older adults, everyone really. It's a gratitude journal, again, with like daily devotionals and just a space to keep track of gifts and blessings, and a way of reflecting.
It goes through the sermon, through the lens of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, that one's based on the Sermon on the Mount. So that's what we've done so far, and we've got other ideas in the works and hope to just keep going along the same.
I understand the need sometimes to be a little bit close to the vest about what you're doing next, because plans can change and you might set expectations that you don't want to set until they're almost done. We deal with that in our side of the publishing world. But so let me ask some questions that might be a little bit less specific, and then I'll ask you, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about plans that are maybe more immediate. But if you are you able, well, try to be looking at yourself 30 years from now as it relates to this publishing. That sounds like a long time since you're not 30 yet, but I can assure you it goes faster than you realize. But look back on your career doing this from maybe 30 years from now. What would you say today would make you say, that's what we hoped would happen?
That's a great question.
Well, I think, so one thing that has surprisingly happened, given I made the first countdown wreath at age 14. One surprising thing that has happened is we have people reaching out going, my parents bought this wreath and we grew up with it, and we're now having families of our own, and we'd like to buy one for our own children. And
Isn't that great?
So
yeah,
that's not exactly an answer to your question, but I'd like to see a lot more of that.
Well,
I guess tangentially, on that second day where we got a bunch of different children's books and spread them out, one of my favorite children's books is Peter Spear's Noah's Ark. And I'm almost 30, and I love that. Like I like, as an adult, I love that book, and like I can't wait until our first little one is old enough for me to read it to her and she understands. And Peter Spear passed away.
And just for the record, you'll be tempted to do that before she can understand, but you'll
oh,
think.
yeah. Oh, 100%. Yep.
Peter Spear passed away just a few short years ago. Just a few years ago he passed away. But his works are still making such an impact and are loved by all ages. So I think in 30 years, I think that people who grew up with it are started doing it with their own children, that it's really an heirloom, and it's a tradition that's passed down. I think
like intergenerational.
Yeah. I think is the goal, that it's making that big of an impact. And you would see that with Veritas Press. I would assume that the children who grew up with Omnibus or not Omnibus yet, but certainly the history cards are starting to use it with their own children.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So I think that's what 30 years from now I would hope to see more of.
Yeah. That's wonderful. What is it about Advent and anticipatory buildup that has captured your imagination?
I think one of the things that we think about a lot at the Keeping Company is the fact that, there are kind of two things. One is the idea that we as Christians are kind of in some ways designed for celebration. Like, we have this amazing gift of grace and redemption, and there's so many good things to celebrate. There's so many gifts that God has given us, and there's so many places that celebration is highlighted in Scripture. And so just the idea that as a Christian family, as a Christian couple raising children, or as Christian individuals, we should be savoring those moments of celebration, whether that's the celebration of Christ's birth or the celebration of Christ's resurrection, the celebration of a birthday or an anniversary, just those everyday life moments that are so special, that can so easily pass us by. And there's just this idea that, if you take the time to kind of slow down and savor something, and a really great way to do that is counting down to it. As a kid, if you have your calendar on your desk, like you mark down the days to the start of school or to the end of school or to spring break or whatever. Yeah. Counting down to something is a really great way to kind of take a moment and pause and really savor kind of the anticipation of that celebration. And in a lot of ways, it then makes that celebration all the sweeter. And so I think that's something that has, like you said, kind of captured our imagination. And the name of the company, the Keeping Company, comes from this idea of keeping company with Christ every day. So whether that's through like the anticipation of walking to the cradle or walking to the cross with Christ, his journey, whether it's that, whether it's like going back to our gratitude journal, the idea of keeping company with Christ every day in gratitude, kind of with this posture of giving thanks. Whether as a child, it's this idea of just like reading books that point you back to Christ every day. That's kind of what we're all about, is just encouraging families and giving resources for people to be able to like savor that celebration and keep company with Christ every day.
Wonderful. So what are some of the things that you're comfortable talking about that are in front of you, things that you're wanting to create or considering?
So the gratitude journal that we had done did fairly well. It was again through the Sermon on the lens of the Sermon on the Mount. We want to do a follow-up that looks somewhat at the Psalms, and what's the name of that theologian?
Oh, I forget his name.
Oh dear, I'm having a moment. But he talks about how the Psalms are basically orientation. It basically goes from you're oriented to chaos to reorientation. There's a, and you see it in David, and he's like, just woe is me, and then turning back to the Lord. And so we sort of wanted to have a focus on that it's not always hunky-dory, that there are hard days where it's hard to give thanks. Yeah. So that's one thing we've been wrestling with and working on. The other one, and this is a little bit further out from what we've done in the past, a little bit more mainstream, if you will, is I want to do a little a children's story on a robotic vacuum cleaner that gets lost. And
a robotic vacuum cleaner?
Yes. And,
it could go a lot of directions.
Yes. So there's a little story that goes that when you're young you want to change the world, and then you get a little older and you want to change your country, and you get a little older and you're like, well, maybe if I could just change my town. And then you get a little older and you're like, no, maybe I could just change my family. And then you get old and you're like, well, maybe if I could just change myself. And then realization, if I had changed myself, maybe I could have changed my family, and my family could have changed the town could, and so on and so forth. And so I think the gist of the story would be something along the lines of the robotic vacuum cleaner wants to clean the world, and sort of escapes and wanders off. And the impact would have, the moral of the story, so to speak, would be that there's value in cleaning and doing well what's in front of you, even if it doesn't appear to necessarily be world changing. And I haven't figured out exactly how the end of the story ties together. And I guess the business side of my mind goes, I think there's 15 million people who have bought robotic vacuum cleaners, and I think a lot more people are going to buy that. And people seem to humanize them. Like you see so many memes and you see so many little videos of people treating it like a little human. So I think a lot of young families will have robotic vacuum cleaners, and there'll be a market niche for a story that goes along with that. Now, it's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse, just a little bit, but I think it can speak to, doing well what's in front of you. And I think that's something we've been talking about, toying with for half a year now.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but one of the things that I've enjoyed most in the curriculum creation aspect of our business is that creative idea formation time. I don't do a lot of writing, but I'm involved in the shaping of things on the front end. And I really enjoy that. Sounds to me like you guys are enjoying that too.
Yeah.
May I ask, like, so how did how did the art cards, when did you originally come up with that? And if like a condensed, like, how did you turn that into curriculum? And like, how did
You mean the history cards?
Yeah, history cards,
Yeah.
how did that turn into curriculum, and how did that then turn into omnibus, like getting Gene Edward Veith and like Douglas Wilson, how bringing those on board to like write some of those essays? How did that, like, it's quite the story. I'm sorry, we're getting off track. I'm just curious.
That's a very long story to take that path. And maybe what we need to do is have Laurie and I record a podcast on that.
I would watch that.
The short of it is, for the history cards and then the Bible cards, we became familiar with the idea of classical Christian education when we read Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning in 92.
Mhm.
Took the initiative to start a school in Orlando, and that school is still a wonderful going concern called the Geneva School, and we haven't been involved with it for 30 years or more. And with that, so here we are starting a school very early on in the resurgence of an interest in classical Christian education, and we saw the importance, the value of a timeline approach from creation to present for history. We also saw the value of the grammar of learning the scriptures, connecting to that. And so the idea of those coming together in overlap and in parallel made a lot of sense. Students understanding that something that happened in the Bible didn't happen before recorded history just because the Bible's older or some other misconception that young children sometimes have, but to be able to place those things together. And then it was just the idea of systematizing it in a way that we could build a regular school year for each of, in this case for history, 5 time periods, Bible, 5 portions of scripture, 3 of them in the Old Testament, 2 in the New. And so systemizing it made us determine how many weeks were we dealing with, how many events, thinking systematically, 1 event per week. And so it was, the organization of it is kind of my niche. The content of it is kind of Laurie's niche, and the creative and the systematic came together in what resulted. And that's kind of the short version of it.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that about like the creative and the systematic coming together, because that's kind of why Caleb and I work well together. He's very much like the creative powerhouse, and then he's the one with all the ideas. I'm the one that tends to be a little more like organized and systematic, and maybe, I don't know if realistic is the right word, maybe pessimistic is the right word. But you're absolutely right.
A healthy sense of pessimism is realism.
Yeah, exactly. But you're absolutely right that like it's sometimes in the production of things, like production or marketing or whatever, it can get really stressful, and that's like not
the idea
the fun part. There's like logistics and stuff.
Testing something. Is it gonna stay? Is it gonna work?
Exactly. But the actual like creative, like when we're sitting down brainstorming ideas, like bouncing ideas off of each other, that's when I think we have the most fun. That's when we really, really love what we do. I mean, that and then seeing the final product and getting like the email or the response from someone, the Instagram comment that says like, wow, your work has been such a blessing. Like it's blessed our family, or
Yeah.
it blessed me as a child, and now as an adult, I'm coming back. Like,
That gets you up in the morning, doesn't it?
exactly. It's like the beginning, the creative stages, and then, at the end seeing the impact, of course. But yeah, bouncing ideas off each other and going through that creative phase is really like super fun.
I have one last question, and so I hope you can be quick on this because we're about out of time, but I really got to ask you. Help parents and students that might listen to this understand what they should expect, how they can benefit in the same way you all did from your education at Veritas. What would you offer them?
I would say easily one of the strongest takeaways from my experience at Veritas was just a deep enjoyment and love of learning that has stuck with me through my entire life. And it's really great because as an adult running a business, being married to Caleb, doing this together every single day, that love of learning spurs so much of what we do. That like the creative process, the brainstorming, trying to create something. There's so many times when I think back to my high school days and I approach a business project or a project for our company, a creative project, the same way I would have an omnibus paper or a rhetoric speech or something like that. It's the same mechanics. And there are just so many times during my everyday week that I think back and I'm like, wow, the skills that I learned through Veritas are still to this day the skills that I'm using every day to do what I do. And those skills were taught, and I was able to practice those skills with just an immense sense of joy and appreciation for what I was learning, and a thirst to always be learning more. So I think that is definitely something you can look forward to.
That is wonderful. Caleb, what would you add to that?
My quick summary of the value that Veritas Press provided, and was especially in Omnibus, how everything is interconnected together. It's not a standalone silo, that it all interconnects. And the reading load was quite high, but it was good to read separate works together and have your brain be able to connect things that you wouldn't otherwise. So I think that was the big value for me, and I think others would have similar value.
Yeah, I would echo that as a very important part of what we're trying to accomplish. We live in a world where most educational experience is siloed. You take math class, you go across the hall to science class, and then you go to composition, and there is no connection. And the whole idea of classical education and of Omnibus in particular has been to build those bridges and to recognize the unified whole in the educational process, because knowledge doesn't have compartments like that.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's wonderful. Guys, thank you so much. Caleb and Melba, you guys are doing great. Keep up the good work. Thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having us. This was so great. Thank you so much.
Folks, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. We hope you'll join us next time.